All right. Well, thank you again for inviting me to be here today. For those of you I haven't met, my name is Alan Taylor. As he said, I run the global network for Endeavor, which is a worldwide organization that supports high-impact entrepreneurs here in Turkey, in Brazil, and in a lot of different markets around the world, in MENA, in Latin America, in Africa, and now in Southeast Asia. I live and work in San Francisco and Silicon Valley, but I spend about half my time in emerging markets around the world, including a lot of time in the last 2 years here in Turkey and in Brazil. So I'm very excited to be here with you guys to cover this topic of kind of Brazil and Turkey, Brazil versus Turkey. I don't know exactly how this is. We were joking that I think Brazil did play Turkey in the last World Cup. I don't know if people remember how that went. I think it went better for Brazil. But today we're really going to focus on talking about kind of the tech sector, the internet market, and a little bit about the venture capital ecosystem and investors and entrepreneurs working together, both in Brazil and in Turkey, and kind of what these two markets can potentially learn from one another. So before we jump into it, I do want to give each of our panelists a chance to introduce themselves. We were originally to have 2 panelists from Brazil and 2 from Turkey. One of our panelists unfortunately had to leave and go to the airport since we were running a little bit behind schedule. But we're really happy to have such a wonderful panel with us here today. So I'll give them just a quick chance to say hello. Maybe Eric, starting with you, just tell for the folks in the audience who may not be familiar with Monashees a little bit about what you guys are, what you do in Brazil, and then maybe you could also note for them, what the heck is a Brazilian VC doing in Istanbul?
Merhaba, Türkiye'de olmaktan çok mutluyum. So I learned some words in
Alan,
Turkish.
better than you.
The rest, that's it. My Turkish is a little bit rusty.
Rusty, yeah, no, you haven't practiced much.
No, it's as you can imagine, it's a great pleasure to be here and participate in this panel and see, I can feel in the energy here in this event and in the last couple of days in the Endeavor event, very similar energy of what's happening in Brazil. So I'm glad to see this whole movement of entrepreneurship really kind of picking up and growing around the world. So there are some similarities. It would be great to explore them in the discussions here. I am actually the founder of a venture capital firm in Brazil called Monashees Capital. We started the firm back in 2005, so it's been 7 years. As a coincidence, we actually completed 7 years yesterday. And when we started, it was a very contrarian strategy. Nobody was looking at venture capital. My partner and I, the co-founders, were very passionate about early stage VC, and we were betting on the country growing and on internet growing and venture capital growing. And after a few years, really things started to happen. We focus on early stage, seed round and Series A rounds, consumer internet mostly, but we also look at some other things, education technology, software as service. And the Brazilian market in the last couple of years has really developed, but it's still very, very early. We have 24 companies in our portfolio. We have a selective approach, and we're very hands-on. We try to help as much as we can entrepreneurs. What I'm doing in Turkey, basically I had the pleasure to be a panelist at the Endeavor International Selection Panel that was held in the last few days here in Istanbul. It's my first time in Turkey, first time in Istanbul. I could see, it's a great city, really. I plan to hopefully come back many times. Thank you again for the invitation.
Excellent. No, thanks for that. Jem, to you just quickly, I mean, you've kind of been in the internet space for a long time now here in Turkey. What are you spending your time on today, and what are you the most excited about?
Sure. First of all, obrigado, Eric. It's Brazil and Turkey is a theme that we've been hearing over the last couple of years. I think Brazil has, just as Turkey has reached a new milestone in the development of the tech ecosystem, which is very much evidenced by the Webrazi events. I mean, if you compare this to 4 or 5 years ago, there's no comparison. So just as Turkey is now going through the first paces of that institutionalization of the ecosystem, I think Brazil is now taking the next step of some of these companies and the ecosystem now maturing. You know, when you look at some of the sizes of the rounds of funding in Brazil, you're seeing that it's actually a fantastic role model for Turkey. I think investors and the investors of investors around the world are, I think, noticing the parallels and are very keen. So, as a Turk in the regional venture capital ecosystem, it's very important, I think, for us to try to understand the learnings from the Brazilian market. You know, what pioneers like Eric have been through. That's critical.
That's great. And you use the word pioneer to talk about Eric and Monashees, which very much, I've heard that applied quite a few times, or even the idea of being a venturepreneur, right? This is an entrepreneur, venture capitalist. Numan, you are also a pioneer in a way with what you guys have launched recently with 212 Ventures. Do you want to tell the audience just a little bit about that?
Yeah, as 212 we launched last year, December. We already have 6 companies. I'm one of the co-founders. Our portfolio is basically mirrors what's happening in Turkey, is e-commerce, gaming, platform, and also the software as a service solutions for hospitality sector. So we are actually right now only local VC, I would say that, and there are a lot of VCs that are open offices, which is quite good. It helps the competition, it helps the market, because what we see is only way that we can grow the market is basically collaborating with other investors and working together with everyone.
Mm-hmm. Great. Well, I have a few questions I'm going to run through here. We'll try to keep this fast-paced and fun, and then we'll leave a couple minutes at the end, hopefully, if you guys have questions about Brazil or about Brazil and Turkey, we can do that together. I guess coming back to this concept, Eric, of being a pioneer or a venturepreneur, I mean, if you think back to 2005, did people think you were just crazy for trying to start a venture capital fund in Brazil?
Yes, actually, they thought. A lot of people and a lot of smart people just said, well, there are other ways of, trying to do some things that are more realistic. You know, at that time, there was no deal flow. We were still living the nuclear winter following the crash of NASDAQ, that really a lot of people in Brazil lost money investing in internet in the first cycle. There was no market at the time. It was a purely speculative bubble, but it created a kind of a trauma, both in entrepreneurs and in investors. So by 2005, 4 years or 5 years after that, we still were in this like desert of deals, of companies, but we could see some signals that the market was really picking up in the US, and it was just a matter of time until we would have a vibrant ecosystem around internet. You know, basically internet is a layer of technology covering the economy, the society, and there are lots of great business opportunities. It's so clear now, but back in 2005, I think people were skeptical. We actually started Monashees out of passion for VC. I had worked with venture capital before. My partner, Fabio Eagle, also, he was doing some angel investing by his own efforts. And we said, well, we want to build a true kind of Silicon Valley style tech VC in Brazil, even if it takes a long time. Our strategic plan for Monashees Capital is a 15-year plan to establish Monashees.
Wow.
It's been 7 years, so it's not kind of halfway through the marathon. It's like we're kilometer 20 of the marathon. It takes time. It's a long cycle. So I think there's a similarity between starting a VC firm and being an entrepreneur. You have to basically go against the common sense to really succeed and create something great. So we identify ourselves a lot with the entrepreneurs that come to us with a vision, with an idea, want to build something different, and everybody's saying, oh, you're crazy, it's not going to work. So the fact that we are doing it too just puts us kind of close to entrepreneurs, and that's I like the term. I didn't know venturepreneur. I think we're probably going to adopt it because I think we like to believe that we are also entrepreneurs, and so we speak the same language as entrepreneurs.
And Numan, how about for you in starting a VC firm in Turkey, really kind of from scratch? You know, that's not something a lot of people are doing at this stage in kind of Turkey's trajectory.
I'm not that old, but it's okay.
You're what?
I'm not that old, but it's okay.
Have people called you crazy for trying to do this?
They still call us crazy.
They still call you crazy?
They still call us crazy. I mean, basically, you are going to the investors or LPs, telling them that you want their money, and you are going to basically give money back about 5 to 7 years, and they don't have any decisions where you are going to invest the money, and you don't guarantee that they're going to get anything back. Worst things, they will just have one cold glass of water. So it was not easy. It was very difficult times. But luckily, we found really good investors. We partnered with them. And then we have about $30 million in our fund. So it's going very well so far. But I think we need to have more other investors, angel investors, and more other angel groups needs to come, or early stage investors like us.
Yeah. So coming back to the title of this talk, of this panel a little bit, and this idea of the hottest internet markets in the world, Jem, what does that mean to you? I mean, is Turkey one of the hottest internet markets in the world? What kind of metrics would you look at, or things would you track to try to understand that?
I think it goes parallel with a lot of the sessions today that people were reflecting on some of the numbers that demonstrate Turkey's upside. And I think there is a lot of liquidity in the world right now. It's looking for returns, and basically, when you look at the sort of secular growth rates in Turkey and Brazil, these are sort of high growth markets with a rising middle class, rising incomes, sort of global ambitions, and then you look at the amount of venture capital that has gone into these markets, it starts to make sense on a macro basis. Now, to translate that into an actual venture capital ecosystem with professional firms that know what they're doing, et cetera, that's a few steps down. And it doesn't happen just with the capital flow. It happens with the law firms, with the advisors, with the right entrepreneurs who have the right type of backgrounds and ambitions, et cetera. But I think it's really driven by, with the notion that I guess Goldman Sachs was coming up with beyond BRICS, that took Turkey in and started to compare it with Brazil, Russia, India, and China, which have been the big story over the last 10 years of these sort of emerging markets and the shifting center of gravity in global economic activity. And all of a sudden, Turkey, along with a few other countries, some call it the missed countries, are now being looked at with that lens on. And I think, when you combine that with the transition economic activity onto the connected world, e-commerce being one of this, digital media being the other leg, and some of the relatively quick to implement types of businesses that have now grown in these companies. Again, some major e-commerce companies have grown very, very quickly. We've had success stories like Trendyol, Marcofoni, Peak Games, etc. In the Turkish market. And similar businesses in Brazil, it just attracts attention. I mean, all of a sudden, you now have the first multi-$100-million exits in Turkey. You have late-stage growth investors like General Atlantic, who just invested in Yemek Sepeti. These are all developments that are constantly pointing new eyes into the Turkish situation. So I think that's what both markets are really benefiting from, and being categorized as being relatively attractive markets in global technology.
Yeah, so would you say, do you think Turkey has something to learn from other markets like Brazil, Russia, India, China, in some ways even more so than looking at the US or Europe?
Well, absolutely, because I think these are markets that are going through similar transitions, and vis-a-vis infrastructure, vis-a-vis payment systems, internet connectivity and landscapes. Sometimes some of these markets are leapfrogging intermediate technologies to go beyond to the next generation layers, etc. So the historic learnings have always been from the US, maybe Japan, or Europe, Western Europe, in terms of looking at the developed markets. But I think now the businesses, the entrepreneurs in these large emerging markets are also looking to learn from each other. Just to illustrate, I have an investment in Russia in an e-commerce platform, and I was invited to participate in that investment because of my e-commerce experience in the Turkish market, which they thought would be relevant. So we are certainly seeing some of that.
So we were talking upstairs a little bit, and actually I've heard over the last couple of days in asking people this question about kind of comparing Brazil and Turkey a little bit on where they are in this growth trajectory. Eric, I come back to you. Some people have said that in certain ways, if you look at kind of Silicon Valley or international venture activity in the country, or the level of angel investment in the country, or even kind of where some of the growth is in some of the different e-commerce verticals, that Turkey today might look something like what Brazil looked like 3 or 4 years ago, perhaps. If you can think back and remember sort of what sectors or what business models or what things were most exciting 3 or 4 years ago, what was that then? You know, what was interesting 3 or 4 years ago in Brazil? It's a memory test.
No, it's a good question. I'd like to just take a step back on that, because it's, I think even if you think that there's maybe 3 years of this gap, it doesn't mean that it's going to take 3-4 years to get there, to where Brazil is. I think you can leapfrog, because things are accelerating. You know, there's a lot of sharing of knowledge around the world. So it doesn't mean that what happened in Brazil 3 years ago, even if we are 3 years ahead or whatever, it's going to take 3 or 4 years. I think things are developing faster. It's basically in the end linked to internet penetration of smartphones, number of real consumers online, and in the ability to consume and payment services, like Jean just mentioned. So that the whole infrastructure on one side, so you can build real businesses that can grow. And then you attract investors. Then you need to have the entrepreneurs, which are you guys here, that will have to have the vision, the courage, the risk-taking appetite to really say, instead of working for a corporation and, you know, in a more kind of safe way, no, I'm going to take the risk of starting my own business. So that's what's really going to drive this market, and I think you're at a very interesting inflection point here from what I can see in Turkey. And then you attract the right investors, because in the end, venture capital is a technology. It's a growth acceleration technology. Basically, use venture capital money in stages. It's called staged financing to accelerate growth. So you have a good idea in a good market, in a great entrepreneur, and a company that would take 20 years to grow organically with their own resources. You put the resources in stages so you don't destroy the incentives, and you can grow in 3 to 5 years what would take maybe 10 to 20 years. But this appetite to invest will only exist when you have the combination of factors of the market is there and the entrepreneur is there, and then you will attract the investors. What I think is key in Brazil is that we looked at that trend, we invest very early, but a critical point in Brazil was the Silicon Valley VCs, which are expert in this. They've been doing this for 40 years, using stage financing to create the largest, most successful technology companies in the world. You know, they only had this appetite to invest, especially in the growth phase, when they saw those conditions happen. And I think there are all the conditions here, and you see some signals today that you're entering that phase.
Yeah.
In terms of specific market segments, to answer your question, it is tricky because I don't know much about the Turkish market, but I can say that obviously you see all these kind of more infrastructure services in terms of payment services. You see some online advertising tends to really go up and attract more of the budget of advertising. So businesses related to advertising technology and media technology. E-commerce, obviously, as you have more consumers online. So probably those are the first ones. and that you have to look at. But I'm very bullish on e-learning and education, very bullish on software as service, very bullish on fintech, on health care tech, and there are other segments that will evolve. And as you leapfrog, maybe it's not too early to really start businesses around these other segments.
Mm-hmm. Just to touch a little bit on kind of the relationship between entrepreneurs and investors and what that looks like. I was rereading a New York Times article from last year, Eric, that talked about Monashees as kind of developing a new paradigm for the type of relationship that sort of nurtures entrepreneurs in a very positive and value-increasing way. What for you are some of the ways that as an early stage VC, you actually do try to add value to the companies you're investing in?
I don't know how similar that is in Turkey, but in Brazil, I think historically there was a lot of conflict between investors and entrepreneurs in early stage investing. So there was not a lot of trust. Entrepreneurs would think that, oh, an early stage investor or a venture capital will steal my company or dilute me. And so there was not a lot of trust. And I don't blame them. There were lots of problems historically. So we had to deal with that in a way that, you know, there was a lot of education in the market. And basically, we thought that was an opportunity. First, because we believe in partnership, constructive relationships, relationships of trust and loyalty between entrepreneurs and VCs. We have to sit at the same side of the table. Otherwise, it doesn't work. There's no way it's going to work. So we had, I think, a different style. And that attracted the attention of entrepreneurs, and entrepreneurs talk to each other. So at the core of our principles, I don't call it strategy because it's not something that is a choice to be successful or not. It's something we truly believe. We have a lot of respect for entrepreneurs and really admire entrepreneurs. So we treat entrepreneurs with a lot of respect. Even if it's something we're not going to invest, we give feedback, we try to be constructive. And every meeting with entrepreneur is an opportunity to communicate our values. And with time, this happens. So I think we're basically getting some of the results of these this behavior over time. And I like to believe that we are contributing to change the relationship between entrepreneurs and investors in Brazil.
Yeah, my observation would be, having spent a lot of time in Brazil the last couple of years, that's a new thing, right? That kind of trust relationship between entrepreneurs and investors. There's really a handful of firms that are leading and changing that culture. And I see the same thing starting to happen now in Turkey. Yeah. Numan and Jem, for you guys, what advice do you give to entrepreneurs? You know, maybe there's entrepreneurs here in the audience or someday, you know, aspirational entrepreneurs. What advice would you give to them in terms of what to look for in an investor as a partner in their company, especially at an early stage?
What I will say is, before on that, I mean, I agree with Eric on that. The change will happen much faster because last 2 years I've been here, I'm seeing that change dramatically is changing. I mean, leapfrog. 2 years ago when I was talking with entrepreneurs, they didn't know anything about some term sheets, conditions, or what the investment is. Now, they are coming and meeting with us with their own terms, and they're saying, we want to have this rights and that kind of stuff, which is quite good, actually. On the same thing, for your question, I will say that trust is the most important thing because we are going to basically partner together, and we will be together for next 5, 6, 7 years. And without trust, without basically integrity, you can't do the business at all. So as much as I trust those entrepreneurs and put in the money in their business, they also need to trust us and understand that we are there together to make their business better and successful. So that's the number one thing. And another thing is also, they also need to understand that we are basically trying to do what is right for their company and what is right for the ecosystem also at the same time. So that's also very important, I think.
Jem?
I get asked the same question a lot from the other side. What does an investor look for in an entrepreneur? And my answer is always the same. It's people. You know, I invest in people, so I look at the people. I don't, you know, everything else is secondary. I think to your question, the answer is the same. I think when an entrepreneur is looking for an investor or deciding who to partner with for their business, I think they have to look at the people. are these people they can trust, they can work with, very much like what Numan was saying. And yesterday there was a conversation at a dinner table around the role of a venture capitalist, which we sort of collectively believe that the venture capitalist is a service provider to the entrepreneur. The entrepreneur, the company, the startup is the client. So I think an entrepreneur should look at a VC the same way they would look at a consultant. Would they hire a consultant? Because they're about to write a very large equity payment to that consultant, so they better make sure that they're hiring the right people to help them grow.
I think coming back to this idea of Brazil versus Turkey, hottest internet markets in the world, let's say I'm a 25-year-old, I live in London. Let's say by some great accident my mother's Turkish and my dad's Brazilian, right? So I speak both languages, and I want to start an internet company. Today, 2012, where should I move? Sao Paulo or Istanbul?
Well, the traffic jams are the same.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
Well, there are more Brazilian football players coming to Turkey versus Turkish football players going to
Brazil, yeah.
No, joking aside, I think both are very attractive markets. I think some of the interesting things about Turkey right now is the opportunity it presents to radiate into the region, which I think is probably less developed than the region that surrounds Brazil. Now, given that Brazil itself is a much bigger market than Turkey, probably about 3 times is the ballpark estimate. But Turkey has, for example, as Peak Games is demonstrating, expanding into the MENA region, or as the previous panel touched on, is I think a phenomenal opportunity because it's a big region. Same with Eastern Europe. So that's one advantage I think Turkey does present.
And also, when you look at the market right now in Turkey, it's where it's going through, where it's going to be in 2-3 years later, because you can see the example. We were just talking about before Brazil. 3-4 years ago, 2-3 years ago, it's like in Turkey now. So you know where it's going to go. If you do the right thing, if you put your things in the right places and good execution, there's only one way, it's up.
Yeah, it's a tough. As I said, I don't know much about I hear great things. I don't know much about the specifics of the Turkish market. Heard a lot of things these days. I think you have to separate, like in terms of economic growth, I think Turkey is ahead. In terms of stage of development, the fact that you're 3 years maybe before the stage that Brazil is today, if you're patient and if you're looking at the long run, I think there are more opportunities in Turkey, and Brazil is becoming very competitive very quickly, even though it's still early in Brazil too. But I also think Turkey is good. Now, if you look at there's one very important metric or criteria, which is size of the market. So if you want to build, and it really depends on the concept of high impact entrepreneurship. If you really want to build a large company, a really large company, the size of the market matters a lot. So the fact that Brazil has a larger domestic economy, because I agree that you can go international, but we all know that it's very hard to go international, especially at an early stage of the company. That's a distraction that most of the times entrepreneurs cannot afford. So you have to focus on one market. And the fact that the Brazilian market is not much larger, but maybe, I don't know, twice or 3 times the Turkish market, that not only creates more space to build a large company, but also it actually, if you put a bar of what's the minimum size of a niche market that you want, you will have more niches in Brazil that are significant in terms of market size than in Turkey. So it really depends on how you look at it. I think both countries have great opportunities.
So not surprisingly, I think to summarize, it sounds like the Turks say Turkey and the Brazilian says Brazil. But we'll let that one get settled in the next World Cup, I suppose. I see Arda stalking us here, so I think actually we've run out of time. No questions from the audience. But I do want to say, it's been really interesting tracking kind of the internet market and venture capital, through Endeavor's lens in Brazil over the last few years, and particularly in Silicon Valley, seeing how bullish all those Silicon Valley firms have been about Brazil. And I do think more and more we're starting to see them really be bullish about Turkey, and so it's exciting to see Silicon Valley and the international venture community start to become, maybe we could call it Islam bullish, Ooh.
Nice.
Can you translate that joke? I don't know if that's going to work.
It's not possible. Istanbul. We tried that because like it was one of your topic suggestions.
Yeah.
And we couldn't translate it in Turkish, so we didn't use that.
Okay, fair enough. Well, in that case, please join me in thanking our panel for coming all the way from Istanbul and from Sao Paulo.